There are JavaScript development environments for it. You could develop in Java. You name it. You could put Scheme, Smalltalk. You find a language. You know what? Somebody has probably implemented it for Linux. So frankly, if you're of a type that you like to, if you want to learn how to program,
exactly.
you can't ask for a better system, because if you get a Microsoft Windows system, you have no programming languages. You have to buy things like Visual C++ or C#, and you have to add those into your system at a cost.
And you have to go through their functions and through their
absolutely
obtuse sometimes.
Now isn't that where some of the problems are created because of proprietary software like and APIs and stuff on Microsoft Visual Studio?
Yeah, absolutely. If you write things for Microsoft Visual Studio or for C#, generally they are only going to run in that Microsoft environment, because Microsoft ties things in very tightly to their APIs, which tie in very tightly into the operating system. If you write stuff under Linux, now there are different ways you can tie it into Linux if you wish, or you can write it in a more portable manner. You could write stuff. Frankly, I think there's a C# interpreter for Linux. I believe there is.
Mono?
Yeah, Mono is an interpretation of that. That's what I was looking for.
Okay.
So you can write things on Linux that will work on C++ and Windows. You can write things that will port easily over to Windows or over to the Mac or over to any system you desire, because the operating system doesn't tie you in quite as tightly. The programming languages are there, and they tend to be more standard programming languages.
And they're converted. I mean, they go through a conversion process. So your interpreters.
Yeah, if you were or compilers. If you wrote a program under Linux, say in C or C++, you would take it over to Windows and you would run it on their compiler. If you keep the requirements low, if you don't tie into the libraries of Linux, you should be able to compile it over on the Windows side. And you can do that to some degree from Windows to the Linux side, but if you get into their graphical, if you get into their Visual Basic, that is going to tie tightly into their stuff, and that stuff will not as easily.
So essentially, the open source stuff tends to be more portable from Linux to Windows than it would be for, say, writing in Microsoft Visual Studio and trying to get that to run on Linux.
Right. Now,
that stuff's not portable.
It is much harder to port. I'm not going to say it's not portable at all, but it's a much harder
they have no
to take.
We have no incentive here in open source
to lock anybody out.
To create any burden for somebody making a choice to write Windows software if that's what they choose to do.
Right. If you were to write generic C in Windows, you could very easily port that over to Linux, but most people don't choose to do that. They tend to choose to use the proprietary Microsoft tools, which tie you into that environment.
So in this open source idea, let's say if I want to invest some time and do some tweaking and some fiddling, I could take that new version I created, essentially, the new operating system I created by essentially tweaking the existing one, and I could redistribute that.
Absolutely.
And I could, if I wanted to, I could receive some compensation for that redistribution?
Absolutely. I'll just give a quick overview of the GPL, which is what most versions of Linux are released under, because they must be released under it, and you'll see why in a minute. Basically, it says this code is free to use. You've got it. The source code is available to you. You can take this code, do whatever you like with it. But if you distribute that code, if you pass that on to somebody else, you must pass the source code on to the next person. So if you want to take the Linux kernel, the core of the operating system, and change it to work in a way that better suits you,
you just can't close it.
You can't if you distribute it.
Right.
If you say, I want to tweak the operating system to do what I want, and I don't ever want to show anybody else, you don't have to. Sit there, use it on your machine, in your tweak format forever. But if I decide to give it to you, then I have to give you the source code so that you then have the same rights to modify that source code that I had.
And that they can modify your tweaks.
They can modify my tweaks. They can undo
locked somewhere where somebody else can't do the same thing that you did to the operating system.
Right.
You're basically saying, okay, because I did it, I'm going to expect that somebody might do the same thing to me.
Right. They can undo some parts of it.
Right.
And that's the new public license. It basically says you can use this code for whatever you like, but if you redistribute it, you must pass it on with all the rights that you were given.
Right, you can add value, you just can't take away any value.
Right, and you can always sell it for as much as you like. Now, of course, if I take Sabayon Linux and I call it Sabe Bob Linux, Okay, and then I try to sell it for $1 million, somebody's going to go, hey, I could just go download this for free from the same place you got it from. So there is some limit as to what you're going to be able to get out of it. But if I create enough value in this, someone may want to pay money for my version of Linux.
Right. I mean, even for a configuration, because some people don't want to go to the trouble of
Exactly.
optimizing.
Support, or I mean, there's a lot.
Right. I could say I could tweak this in a manner that I like, and I can give it to you and say, you know what, you can have it for free. If you'd like support for this, because you're not as advanced a Linux user as I am, you can pay me for support. That's perfectly legal. So people that say, the GPL is like communism, you can't make any money doing it, oh, you most certainly can. You just cannot lock the code up. I can sell you the code.
You have to add some legitimate value that has an actual market value.
You don't even need to really. You just have to pass on those rights to the next person. So if I sell it to you for $100, and you go, hey, this is the exact same one I downloaded off the website.
I was just assuming you were being honest. I'm just saying it's an honest. You can make an honest dollar.
It could still be honest.
Off of what you've done.
There are companies that take the distributions exactly as they come from their distributors, and they press them on CDs and they sell them for a very low price. There are companies like cheaplights.com. So for $2 or $3, you can get a copy on a disc. So if you wanted to try Linux and you don't have access to a fast internet connection,
right.
You can call these guys up.
You're still getting value. You're getting it printed for you.
You're getting a copy. You're getting a copy on a disc, and if it doesn't work, you can say, "Hey, send me another one," and they will. But that's they haven't added anything to the software at all.
But
what they've done was they've given you everything they were given, so that if you wanted to change it, you've got the keys to do all of that.